All right, hello and welcome to the API3 community call. My name is Ugur and I work as a business developer for API3, and I will be moderating today's session. Just like the last time, we're going to go over some of the questions you asked us through the Google form before opening up for live questions. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop a comment on the YouTube comment section or over Twitter. We have Midhav in the background who's collecting your questions for the second half. As always, we will not be talking about exchanges, prices, or any partnerships that are in the pipeline. Another thing we wanted to clarify is that a lot of you have asked questions in regards to staking. As Burak mentioned in the last call, he is working on an article that will explain everything in detail, which is why we are not going to be talking about it today or taking any questions about it, since we want to avoid throwing you only bits and pieces of information, and Burak is just going to give you a clearer picture of everything. So with that out of the way, I have two familiar faces with me today and two fairly new ones. I'm going to be starting off with Mason and Mark. Mason is one of our business development leads at API3, so if there are any questions in regards to that, you can ask Mason everything that you want to know about business development. Mark deals with regulatory compliance and enterprise strategy. If there's anything you want to ask Mark, feel free to do so as well. Joining us today newly is Eric. Eric is a corporate attorney whose practice has focused on secured finance transactions, primarily aviation, which you can see in our latest video and also blog post. And his experience with API3 dates back a few years, and he helps navigating the many challenges and opportunities with building in the Web3 ecosystem. We also have Andre with us. He has a background in information systems and has been writing code professionally since 2012. He is focusing on the full web development stack, from databases to APIs and backends to web frontends. He built and maintained a large part of the original Honeycomb marketplace, and since about a year ago has been focusing on building out the initial versions of AirNode and Chain API. I want to thank all of you for joining. And we are going to get right ahead and get started with the first question from the ones you submitted to us. So the first one is, why is API3 a foundation if it's a DAO? And this goes to Eric.
All right, thanks. And I just wanted to clarify too, since I just did the Redefining Trust segment, I'm actually leaving my firm and will be working for API3 full-time starting at the end of this month. So that's why I'm on this community call, and I'm really excited to do that. But so the first question is a good one. Why is the API3 a foundation if it's a DAO? The simplest question is, or the simplest answer is that a DAO doesn't have a legal persona in itself. So you want to have a sort of fallback legal entity wrapper for everything that requires meet space agreements, for liability limitation, things like that. So the foundation structure is currently one of the best options. Obviously, there aren't a lot of direct corollaries, so you kind of want to go with the best possible structure given all the circumstances. And for API3, that was a foundation, a limited company foundation in the Cayman Islands, and that's to simplify sort of some of the tax questions. The Cayman Foundation law is pretty well set out for the structure. And you'll notice there are a couple other major projects that have a similar structure. Pocket Network is one. They're also a Cayman Foundation. And I have a lot of experience with Cayman limited companies, Cayman corporations, Cayman foundations from my work at the firm. So it's a familiar structure. But so there's no physical, obviously, location of the DAO. There's no specific jurisdiction unless you accede to one. And you don't want every DAO member to be in a partnership with the others, because then you have joint and several liabilities. So you create this legal fiction, this foundation structure, to act as a backstop and a sponge for all of the meat space stuff. So that's the reason why, you may hear API3 referred to as both a DAO and a foundation. It's just the context, really. So in essence, they're one and the same.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Gonna jump right ahead into the second one, and that is, once the platform is launched, how do you plan to scale up your operations? What are the future plans and features? And this one goes to Andre. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'll try and answer this in the reverse order. So with the future plans and features first, and then how we sort of plan to scale things up. So I think our future features and plans are all pretty well defined at this point. If you've been following the API3 project for a while, these are probably not very new to you. But I think at this point, we want to focus mainly on actually delivering polished features instead of just building out this wish list of future features that may or may not ever happen. So I've tried to write out a list which I think are our sort of immediate points of focus. Yeah, and I'll probably just I'll go through them quickly and then expand on one of them. So I think, yeah, the first one is pub sub and aggregation. So this would be necessary for building out DAPIs. You need a way to sort of combine all of the API responses together and integrate a way to sort of trigger things when a certain condition is met. For example, that a price deviate by a certain percentage. Then we also want to focus on completing the audits. I think the DAO is currently being audited. I'm not going to speak too much about this because, as Ugo mentioned, if you missed it, Burak will be releasing a blog post in the hopefully near-term future about what's happening with the DAO. Then we also want to focus on insurance. Obviously, this is a big part of that whole API3 project. If you look on GitHub, there's also a bit of there's quite a backlog of feature requests, which are often smaller in nature that we're hoping to sort of work through, and this will allow Eno to expand its existing capabilities. So additional ways to authenticate APIs, additional cloud providers, additional ways to deploy, all these sorts of nice to have features. At this point, Eno is pretty stable. So yeah, we're looking to grow it in capabilities. Then building out excellent documentation and examples. I think this is pretty critical to the success of any open source project. You need to have really great documentation, and we're very fortunate that we have at least one full-time developer working on our documentation. If you haven't checked out the documentation website, I recommend it. It's being improved all the time. If you do want to help improve it, I think the code is all, or the documents are all open source. Then also scaling up the team. So we're looking for new developers and people to join all the time. I think everything is on the website, like all of the open positions. Last time I checked, there were quite a few. So yeah, that's another main focus. And then finally, deeper integration of Airnode and API3 with the Chain API project. Chain API is not something that has really been talked about much, but I'm hoping that I can sort of explain a little bit around that. Yeah, because that's been my focus for the last few months now, building out the team and yeah, getting that going. So I guess I can probably actually just give an update now because I'm sure that the questions will come. So Chain API, to be honest, had a bit of a slow start. This is mostly related to hiring developers, getting clear wireframes and polished designs built. It's quite difficult starting a project from scratch with an idea in mind, but to have a sort of concrete path to getting there, it's quite a challenge. And hiring good developers is not an easy task, trust me. But right now the team is sitting at 4 developers. full-time developers on Chain API. We have one full-time UX person. And we've also got a professional design studio who made some really amazing looking designs, which I'm hoping we can share soon. Yeah, I think that as much as Honeycomb, as much as I love Honeycomb, I think one of the areas that was lacking was the design. I'm not a designer, but I think that the Chain API marketplace is going to look quite nice, and I think I'm hoping people will be quite impressed. Then there's also myself. Separate from the 4 full-time developers, I'm doing a more sort of project management role at this point, helping out with where dev is needed. And we're getting input from the API3 team as well. So we at the moment where we are is we've been focusing on just getting everything up and running. We've got authentication working, and our first focus is actually capturing and integrating an API, because this is obviously the most critical part to getting AirNode actually usable to a more mainstream audience, to a broader audience. Sorry, and I guess this is it's a foundation, and once we have this, we will be able to allow users to generate the configuration needed to easily run an AirNode, to get up and running with a couple of commands. We'll see how that goes. But at the moment, everything is going really well. The team is working well. And we've got a nice space going. So I'm excited to reveal things in the short-term future.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Andre. I just want to mention again, if you guys have any questions for the second half of this community call, we're going to be taking live questions. You can already drop them in the comment section, either on YouTube or Twitter, and we have Mitav in the background who is collecting them. So third question was for Mason, and that is, who are you guys reaching out to in terms of APIs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're reaching out to pretty much any quality API from any industry when it makes sense. We care a lot about the quality and the quantity. Obviously, with the future building of like DAPIs and the insurance piece and all that stuff, it needs to have a pretty big ecosystem of API providers. And so a lot of our business development efforts are going to having those conversations industry-wide. So a lot of that can kind of boil down to just cold outreach or attending conferences, networking. So we're kind of hitting that in a lot of different ways. But essentially, there is no API provider, big or small, that we're not interested in, as long as obviously it is of quality and a brand that makes sense for like the future of our product offerings as well.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I'm going to be jumping right to the next one. This goes to Mark and Eric, and I guess Mark wants to start on this one, so I'm going to be passing it on to him. Why is GDPR important?
Whoa, that's a broad question. If you think of the first point, why is it important generally, we could be here for a long time. It's personal data and how you handle it. But I think the most direct way we should address it now is, why is GDPR important in terms of the product and the service we provide and blockchain going forward? It's important because it's a barrier. We're essentially a business-to-business platform, both for blockchain projects and people who want to publish their data to the blockchain. And it is a barrier for companies who are outside the space, mainly because of the penalties for breaches in compliance. It's a huge liability concern. Companies have two main barriers. One is the token barrier, compliance and shareholder reporting and value reporting. The other big barrier is GDPR, mainly because if there is a breach and you have to provide evidence to support the fact that there wasn't a breach, to protect yourself. The penalties and liabilities are large for each one. I think, if I recall right, it's something like 4 million euros for a breach, or depending on severity, or 20% of your revenue. Whichever is larger is the rule. So what happens is, in the corporate space and in medium to large to enterprise class companies, is they set a policy with their legal department that basically states that this company is compliant, and any partner or supplier, they won't deal with a partner or supplier in any space that isn't compliant. They'll explore the possibility, but once they discover you're not compliant, they won't engage, because their policy states they can't, and or that policy is put in place because of the potential issues if there is a breach, which basically would point back to them if their partner isn't compliant. So it was a very, very important piece to address, to remove that barrier, so that the space can expand, so that more companies can put richer amounts and varieties and types of API-driven data onto the blockchain, present it for projects to build use cases on. And it's not just price feeds, it's many, many, many varieties that we haven't seen yet, because we've been so focused on price and speculation. There's weather, energy use, utility use, transport, aviation, logistics, facilities management, inventory and maintenance throughout industry. That's just a few that I can think of off the top of my head. So removing this barrier for a business-to-business project, so that it can be, passed through and presented to blockchain companies to use and add value to that company, is a very important thing to do.
Great. We also had Eric who wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk in the chicken and egg problem in Web3 in general. Having something built in order to be used, and having a demand or desired use in order for it to be built. That's not the case when it comes to GDPR compliance. You need to be compliant in order for people to be onboarded and people to accede to this ecosystem. And I see there was a question on how can you ensure the way you handle data is GDPR compliant. Well, the basic structure of Airnode was just certified as GDPR compliant, and from there, it's how the data is accedes to the data provider's terms and conditions. So, these data providers are going to be deploying Airnodes, and the protection and privacy of their data, which are the two main pillars of GDPR, is going to be essentially in line with the way they provide data now, and the way they, restrict usage through their terms and conditions, have parameters and what can and can't be done. But the important thing is that Airnode has been given this GDPR compliant status in the way it's intended to be used. And now data providers, that's essentially their first question. There may be top 3 questions. The others being, how can we be sure that our margins aren't getting ripped off? How can we be sure there's no unauthorized resale, that sort of thing, which are solved by the first party structure in general. But the GDPR compliance is very important. And Mark mentioned that there's huge liability, and I'm not sure if he mentioned or not that it's often a per instance, which means these penalties can multiply very quickly, and it's a huge concern. I remember when GDPR kind of came into vogue or really was enacted, every industry in basically everywhere in the world had a kind of oh my God moment, how are we going to turn around and be compliant? This touches just about everything. So it's essential, and it's fantastic that Airnode has this.
Perfect. Thanks for that comment. Again, just a friendly reminder, if you do have questions now, just drop them in the comment section so we can gather them up for the second half of the AMA or the community call. The next one goes to Andre again. There are a lot of contributions from core devs and private repositories. Can you explain what they are for?
Sure. Yeah, so there's not really much to this. There's nothing crazy happening in the background. Yeah, so mostly these are related to a few things. One of them is the API3.org website, which gets updates every now and then. Then there's also, we use the private repos for some rough drafts, like potential updates to protocols, things like that. And sometimes internal proof of concepts related to these drafts. Then there's obviously Chain API, which is in a separate organization, but you might have seen me committing to it. Well, you might see me committing to private repos, and that might have been Chain API. So there's the web app, which is the front end and back end, and also the infrastructure. Yeah, there's not really too much to say to that.
Thanks for elaborating on that, though. Yeah, I'm going to be passing to the next question, and that goes to Mark. How does GDPR compliance affect firms' willingness to do business with you?
Generally, they won't. Once they find out you're not, that's a short, sweet answer, but generally, yeah, it's very off-putting if you're not compliant, because what we do with being compliant is we enable the company to control its own compliance, because they can basically, because API3 at the Airnode, acts as a gateway, a formatter, and a transport to the data consumer, the company using the node can basically decide what data they're going to publish through it to the data consumer onto the public blockchain. So effectively, they're controlling their own compliance. They're kind of extending it through the node to the edge where the data consumer on the blockchain is. If they can do that, I think they're happy, really, because it puts compliance back in their hands and gives them that kind of control over that particular issue. Whereas if you're not compliant, it's like a brick wall. It's kind of, they don't know. And in terms of the bottom line of any company, an unknown that could possibly seriously impact your bottom line is something they will not even remotely be interested in dealing with. Basically, it is a serious thing for a business to business.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. The next one goes to Mason again. Can you talk a bit about how API providers feel about running a node?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the API provider. So if it's, kind of a larger enterprise that is already building, in like Hyperledger or something for an enterprise, proof of concept, then like running an Ethereum node isn't really a big deal. Like they're kind of familiar with that. By and large, the average provider is not crypto savvy or blockchain savvy at all, though. And so for those people, it's unlikely that they're going to be excited about running a node. It's relatively simple to do, but it's not necessary. Like it's not 100% needed, right? So like if API providers that we're setting up with Airnode, if they're not interested in running like an Ethereum node kind of in tandem with that, then that's completely fine. In regards to like if the question is kind of more about running Airnode, our experience has been that people are completely open to it, right? Because it's lightweight, it's free. There's like no reason not to do it because it opens up your business to a whole new market of customers. So at that point, like the entire kind of framework and rationale behind us even developing Airnode is that there is no friction points here, right? Like not only can they just have us set up the Airnode, they can review the code open source and be comfortable with it beforehand. And then, it's maintenance free. They don't have to like do anything. And now blockchain platforms and applications can actually like connect directly with them if they want their data depending on if there is not really a need for like the security element. So like obviously not everything needs a super high level of security where a decentralized API with like an insurance element really kind of makes sense, right? So think like, I don't know, recipe data or something where there's like not a lot of stakes involved. You know what I mean? So with that being said, it really kind of depends on the provider. But I think the thing that's great about our business model is that we've made it very flexible, and we have kept the off-chain business in mind when designing most of what we're doing. Because of our experience in other projects like Honeycomb, where we saw these disconnects, like not being GDPR compliant, keeping businesses from really wanting to do anything, or like needing to essentially either have a blockchain developer on staff or trust your data with a third party in some way. These are all friction points that, from a business perspective off chain, if you don't know anything about the industry, and you see like some of the risks inherent with the industry being so new, there's a lot of reservations that businesses have had in running a Oracle node, and what running an Oracle node really kind of means outside of the way that we've designed AirNode.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Jumping to Mark again. How does GDPR compliance affect API3 and the space for the future?
I can address that on two levels. How it affects us as a company and as a team. Basically, it opens a potentially massive market for data feeds, and expanding the platforms, expanding the usage, expanding the numbers of people who deploy Air nodes. Because if you think about it, before, if the companies wouldn't explore the possibility or had considerable reluctance without that particular box being ticked and that barrier being removed, that barrier is now gone. So they can now explore that possibility, which kind of generates momentum for them to learn about the space, see how they can build new revenue models, build the bottom line. It's a potential big multiplier. And the design that we have of the node, first party transparency, where the node does not cache personal data, there's no database, it doesn't collect it, doesn't store it, means the companies can control what they put on the blockchain to data consumers. It gives them that comfort, it gives them that level of control, it gives them that transparency, which is a peculiarity of not just the code audit, but also the first party design. That's just for API3. What it does for the space is bigger, really, because if you think before we had compliance, we could only really, the main focus would be blockchain projects. Now it's not. And also for the space, it removes a glass ceiling that was in place before in terms of that made a lot of companies, many companies outside the space, reluctant or unaware, or a combination of both, or not willing to dig any deeper. That barrier is removed, so you will see many more types of API3 driven data, along that top of my head list, probably hugely bigger in terms of types that will be driven onto the blockchain. And there is a certain element of if you build it, they will come. But if you look at historical developments in IT and progression, innovation is built when data availability becomes richer and more varied. I mean, pattern recognition in AI is a prime example of that. The amount of images, that are utilized now by neural networking and machine learning, etc. So yeah, it will hugely expand the space by basically offering all those different varieties of data for people to build projects for and utilize and grow the blockchain space, and also for companies to offer that. There's a synergy, there's a connection between the two, which wasn't properly available before.
Perfect, thank you. So last question before we are going to jump into the live section. If you do have any questions that you want to ask us, now's the time to do so. This last one goes to Mason. what's the purpose of the new blog series?
Yeah, so our new blog series, Redefining Trust, is kind of meant to really just be like an appeal to the off-chain space. So I've mentioned in another AMA and a couple of times, I think, in kind of a public format, that the crypto community is like a really tight-knit community where we're kind of like in an echo chamber. Like, we all see the value here, but from like a business perspective, again, there's just a lot of different aspects of this space that are not convincing people just yet. Okay. And so like when you go about thinking about getting buy-in from a segment of people, you have to kind of break down the value added of blockchain technology in a way that really makes sense in their world, right? So the Redefining Trust blog series is meant to be really kind of meeting people there at off chain, talking about like a high level problem that exists in the real world, and specifically problems around establishing trust. Like, there is a litany of inefficiencies in general across industries, really all around the idea of establishing trust in a way that you can do business and know that you're not going to like fall victim to fraud or something else, like losing money, or just exposing yourself to a lot of different risks. And so redefining trust is essentially that, right? It's like defining the idea of automating trust through blockchain technology, and in various ways that you really can do that. I'm actually really excited about the series. I think that in general, the idea is to kind of create some thought leadership in this space around why blockchain technology is so important and why it is going to be the future of the internet. It's the future of everything. So, to get people to kind of buy into that, you have to really make it easy for them to understand. And, from a business development perspective, talking to a lot of these API providers, excuse me, you can't just go in there trying to explain the technical side of blockchain, right? Like, from a business perspective, people mainly care about whether or not this is going to be like a profitable endeavor for them, what the inherent risks are, and the associated costs and so forth. So if you go in there and try to explain the nitty-gritty details from a development perspective, it goes over people's heads. It's not received very well. And so on and so forth. But the thing that I've noticed is that, people are very interested in this space. The business side of things is very interested in the space. It's a rapidly growing market, akin to, fintech, essentially. So most companies, I think, want to be involved in the blockchain space. And, if you go at them as some kind of like startup, and you have a disregard for regulatory compliance and GDPR, and all that kind of stuff, like it's just one of those things where you really have to kind of like convey the value of blockchain, but you also have to kind of play by the same rules, right? Like, you have to show that you're willing to meet them in the middle, and be a viable option for them to dip their toes into the industry. And so all of that kind of culminated into the idea behind the Redefining Trust series. We just wrote our first one in regards to aviation finance and the inherent issues that are really kind of baked into high value purchases of like aircrafts, where you've got numerous different stakeholders and parties all around the world, all kind of involved in that process, and the problems that can arise. From perspective, I think that the idea is to have a little bit more of like a entertaining and engaging way of describing how blockchain could specifically solve unique problems in the world that have existed for a long time in very mature markets.
Thank you. With that, we're done with the questions that you submitted to us through the Google form. And we're going to be opening up for your live questions. So if you have any, just drop us a comment with your question, either Twitter or YouTube. We're monitoring both. And again, just going to repeat this since I said it at the beginning, may have not went through to everybody. We're not talking about prices, not talking about exchanges, and also not about any potential partnerships in the line. And also anything in regards to staking will be made available through an article from Burak. So we decided to not give you bits and pieces here and there. Burak is going to give you all of the information that will be necessary for you to understand everything around staking at the DAO. The first one I'm going to be taking, just because we touched upon it so much already, is going to be this question. How exactly do you ensure that the way you handle data is GDPR compliant? Can you give an example? And I suppose that goes to Mark.
Yeah, that's fine. How do you ensure it's handled in a compliant fashion? Well, transparency, basically. There's a lot of conflation between encryption and GDPR compliance. Encryption generally is for security-oriented data or commercial data, which is a completely different beast and a completely different regime. Personal data is basically involved with the fundamental principles of GDPR, which are lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, purpose limitation, minimal amounts of collection, accuracy, not holding it for long, integrity, confidentiality, and you've got to be accountable. And people have the rights of somebody whose data is collected, which is to be informed, right of access, restrict, erasure. You can look it up, basically. How do you ensure it's handled? Well, according to the code audit and the design of the Airnode, we handle it in a transparent fashion through a first-party data feed. The company that's providing that data through the Airnode, which is a transparent compliance vehicle, because the data enters the node from the company. We don't cache it, so we're not collecting data. There's no violation there. There's no database, there's no curation, there's no storage, nothing. It passes through to the data consumer, which is the blockchain project. And when we actually had to do the audit with our partner, what actually happened was a legal brief within that audit company basically prepared a list of compliance issues for the code, that it had to do this, couldn't store it, couldn't cache it, couldn't collect it, anything. And what the coders had to do from our partner company, Tacita, had to basically go through the code in the repo for the Airnode and look for those possibilities. And each single file was examined for functional compliance. Does it do any of these things? And every single box had to be ticked for us to pass that audit. And we passed it. Every time a certain production issue of the Airnode changes, then basically what we have to do again is we have to do the audit again and get that box ticked again. So first of all, we ensure the code is compliant, and then we also ensure that every update of the code is audited and compliant in terms of personal data, so that the company providing the data, basically because we're not collecting anything or storing anything or curating it or caching it or populating a database with it, they can control the compliance, because any particular, they either scrub the data before it goes on the public chain according to how they wish to maximize their control from a compliance environment, or they basically engineer the data feed according to their own requirements for that environment. But so the compliance is on them. They control the compliance. We're enabling them to control their own compliance transparently in a manner that is comfortable for them, that addresses any concerns for the bottom line, that addresses any potential breaches. There's no barrier. They can see everything that's going on. They can see everything that's going on to, passing to a blockchain data consumer, and they can control what's published. Our code ensures it's handled properly, and they ensure that they handle their own data properly. So it's kind of a partnership and a learning curve for both parties. And the transparency in the first party design is kind of the core of, and the nature of the code is how that's achieved.
Perfect. Thanks for elaborating on that part. I'm going to be taking the next question, and I guess this can be answered by a lot of people. Will API3 step up on much needed marketing soon? And the second part of the question I just answered before this. That is not something that we're going to be commenting here, since we were waiting on the article from Burak. And whoever wants to take this, pretty much feel free to do so. I think this is probably also something for Mason and maybe also Eric.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So we're actually doing a lot of different things on marketing, but it may just look kind of subtle because not everything that we're doing in marketing is directly aimed at the crypto community. So we've got a lot of different things that we're doing in regards to like our blogs. We're focusing a lot on like future announcements and different things like that. The AMA. This is definitely a part of our marketing approach, right? We also have a lot of different things in the backdrop that you wouldn't really even see, right? Like building out landing pages and marketing videos and different things like that. So not, I think that in general, our entire kind of theory here and like what we really care about is that we're pushing content out that actually makes sense and is of high quality. We care more about high quality content than we do about the quantity of content that we're pushing out, right? And I think that kind of stems from just the fact that, like, in general, we really care about and know the value of our product, and the future of our business model will speak for itself. So while, there, I think, is kind of this tendency to expect a lot of hype around a project, specifically from the team, we are actively pushing against that because we don't want to devalue the actual product. We don't want to hype people up. We want to essentially let the product speak for itself and have that be the root of the excitement, right? So that's kind of how I would answer that question. I think that maybe it's just a matter of your perspective of certain marketing efforts being slightly different from how our approach really is. But yeah, I mean, I can definitely speak from firsthand involvement that we are putting a lot of effort into our marketing, and I think that much of it is a lot more nuanced. It's a matter of setting a tone and a perspective rather than kind of a quick and dirty hype. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Perfect. I don't think anyone else had something to add here. If not, then I'm going to be going to the next one. And I think this is something that Sasha slightly touched upon. I'm not sure if anyone here might be able to add a bit on that. And that is, are you in contact with some insurance company at the moment? And that, I think, refers to how Sasha mentioned that we can talk about insurance models and that there's already a market out there that is very old and has these practices down. And if we're taking note of that and incorporating that into our insurance model. And do we have someone here that might want to? Yeah, if you want to, Mason. I mean, otherwise it's what we said about Sasha.
Yeah, I think she answered it pretty well. The only thing I'll add is I mean, we obviously have a lot of visibility on the insurance space and how we incorporate, very well-defined industry best practices into, the future of our vision and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, some of that comes with just consulting with people who are subject matter experts in their field. And also I think that we've kind of considered a variety of ways in which we approach the insurance aspect of things as well. within like a specific company, no, I don't think that there is like a specific company that we are working directly with in regards to our insurance. So yeah, I mean, and I think Sasha kind of covered the rest. That was just the little addition that I wanted to make on that.
Great, thanks for that. And going to be passing on, just going so we can have as many questions as possible. Again, like if you want to ask us anything right now that is not related to staking, price, or exchanges, do so right now. The next community call will be in about 2 weeks again, so this is your chance. How big is the Oracle space, and what are its growth expectations the coming years? And yeah, Andre, maybe?
Yeah, I guess this is quite a difficult one to answer. I'm more of it focused on the technical side. So, but in terms of like how big I think the space could be, I guess it depends on how big you think the whole smart contract space will be. I think a lot of the more valuable smart contracts that we're going to see in the future are all going to need data from the outside world in one way or another. And yeah, I guess that sort of ties in with how big I think the Oracle space is going to be. In terms of growth expectations, who knows? It's hard to say, but I'm pretty optimistic that the future is looking bright.
So I'll just chime in here. Why not? To me, the Oracle space is really the trust space. There's a direct analogy in the size and breadth and value of the off-chain trust value to what is necessary for agreement execution and multi-party documents and agreements. And it's as simple as single data points that can be brought on to enrich smart contracts, and it can get as elaborate and sophisticated as we can't possibly foresee right now. There are use cases and these sort of synchronicities that can be gained by doing away with some of the costs of trust and programmatically accomplishing things that couldn't be done before or couldn't be done on an automatic basis or on a short timetable. It's a fluff answer, but it's a very broad question. So you have to kind of think about what can be done today with the most basic of infrastructure in place and knowledge in the mainstream basically zero, which is what we're addressing with redefining trust, is to show practitioners you can incorporate this technology and help your business today in marginal ways that are fairly simple implementations, and that edge you'll have from the experience and the marginal efficiencies right now, you can parlay that into entire new business models that you couldn't have thought of before, and you can edge out competition. These are benefits that they're difficult to explain in depth to those that are unfamiliar, but when you parse them out in ways that can be used today, light bulbs click on. And I think the growth expectations are going to be very fast. I think once you see larger institutions in respective sectors dipping their toes in or getting edged out by more lean startups that are willing to take on that risk, you're going to see an accelerating effect of people adopting this technology and understanding how it can be used in today's framework and how they will need to adapt for tomorrow's framework.
Perfect, thanks. And I totally agree on that part. Next one. What's the story with API3 and Cardano? I've seen it referenced in the aviation blog post and on Charles's Twitter. I think in regards to the aviation blog post, Mason is the person that can speak about it since he wrote it.
Yeah, I saw this question a little earlier when it was asked, and I didn't write anything about Cardano in that piece. So I think maybe it was just kind of like you skimmed and maybe saw that I mentioned Cardano, but no, there was nothing mentioned about Cardano on that piece. I actually heard somebody else reference that we were on like Charles Hoskins' Twitter, but I don't think I like even went and looked and didn't see that. So yeah, that is it.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing also to consider is I think a lot of the speculation here comes from the part, and this is not something that, first of all, we're commenting on, but a lot of this Cardano speculation stems from the part that Embargo invested in API3 and is also a DAO member. So anything more than that is speculation that we are not commenting on. So, from Joseph, is being GDPR compliant an issue for Oracle providers such as Chainlink, and how does API3 differ in this regards? Thanks.
I'll take that one. Yeah, you could say that it is an issue because GDPR is about transparency in terms of the data and transparency in terms of the provenance and origin of the data feed. Bridging through a third-party middleman where the identifier as to the source of the data isn't immediately transparent is a compliance issue. Also, the node transporting that data in a third-party structure, the organization providing that service, not say the Oracle provider itself. The Oracle provider has to be compliant, but also every node supplying that service also has to be compliant, both the organization and the code that the node, sorry for the rhyme, is using. So basically every single compliance box has to be ticked. And I should imagine the difficulty of actually aligning all those issues for every single node operator, as well as the organization that they operate within. And every single one of them, in terms of code and organization, being verifiably compliant and being able to demonstrate that in a transparent fashion is exponentially greater than a first-party transparent feed with one piece of code, the node. The difficulty ramps the more people that are involved in the transparency chain. So yes, it is an issue. And encryption won't save you for one reason that has been mentioned. You can obscure the data, but the thing is, if there's a breach report, the regulator doesn't really care about your encryption. What the regulator cares about is you provide him the evidence to support your claim that the breach has not occurred. And the regulator decides what form that evidence takes. And that's a clear piece of paper, soft copy, detailing the data. So if you're encrypted, you have to decrypt. And if it's randomly encrypted, you have to decrypt and reassemble for each single breach inquiry. So encryption in terms of the workload to comply with, a regulator's inquiry about breach request, you're actually making your life more difficult. It's a false correlation. Encryption is good for government security data, which again is a different kettle of fish in terms of regulation and compliance, and for sensitive commercial data, because sensitive commercial data on the blockchain is something, and the ability to transact, that's covered by data compliance regulation for commercials, and also things like confidential smart contracts and zero proofs. That's a complete different arena. There is no correlation between the two. This is about transparency and reporting, and have people having the right to sort of look at their own data, if it's curated, if it's cached, if it's on a database, anything, which, as I've explained, the node does not do. So yes, it is a huge issue. And I don't think it's been explored sufficiently. And it's design driven.
Perfect. Thanks. We're going to be jumping right to the next one. We only have about 5 minutes left. So how would you encourage the community to start experimenting and working with API3 API feeds?
I guess I can take this one. Yeah, so if you're looking to experiment with API3 and Anode, I guess the first obvious place to start would be the documentation. We've put quite a lot of effort into explaining the different concepts. with some examples. Yeah, and I would read through that. Then I would check out our GitHub. So we also put a lot of we put a lot of effort into making it as easy as possible to get up and running locally. I did a lot of this myself. So if something is not easy and it's not a few commands, I think at maximum it's like 2 or 3 commands to like actually run an air node. If it's not like that, you should reach out to me and I'll fix it. But I really recommend everyone to give that a try, whether you're technical or not. The process should be pretty easy. And yeah, if you have any feedback or improvements that you'd like to suggest, that would be really appreciated. It doesn't matter how small or big they are. Then I guess further to that, if you have any questions, you can reach out to the team. I know a lot of the guys are very active on Telegram, but we also have our Discord, which we use for more of a development focus. And you're more than welcome to reach out to anyone on the team for help.
Perfect. Maybe, I'm not sure if you just want to continue on this one, or maybe you can answer this one because it's from the same person. But this again is like up to, I guess, imagination.
Yeah, I can't help you with your startup ideas. But yeah, I'm not really sure. Anyone else have any suggestions?
I mean, you could do something in regards to like sentiment analysis, probably, right? You could use like how many likes different influencers get, and then aggregate that into some sort of a data analytics tool or something. That's probably what I would do if somebody asked me that point blank, like, you know, on like a call or something. I'd probably say something along those lines. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can incorporate data into a project, right? So like, it's funny that, to me, it's funny that there's this like kind of, you know, idea about like what an Oracle can do or something, because like APIs are the building blocks of all things on the web. So think about literally anything that exists on Web 2.0, and I would say there's probably a even better use for that same kind of data in some new, you know, innovation of the same thing, but like using smart contracts, you know, on a blockchain. So for me, I feel like I get a lot of questions kind of like this where they're like really ambiguous, but if you kind of think about things really holistically, it's kind of easy to like piece together different ways that you could use data, but then also leverage like the benefits of having an immutable ledger and you know, like the full transparency that comes with having things on chain and all that stuff. So it's a good question.
Perfect. We're reaching the end of our time. I think we have like 1 or 2 more questions, and I might take them before we sign off. So we're not taking any more new questions. And I'm not sure if anybody of the attendees today can answer this one, but we're going to find out. Do you plan to attend any ETH, Cardano, ETC meetups, networking with the crypto ecosystem, speaking at conferences, attending BTC Miami? ? Do we? Yeah, go ahead.
I can answer that. I can answer that question. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have like a business development vertical that is all about partnerships within the crypto community. We also go to conferences, and we're like really engaged on both sides, both off and on chain industries we really care about. So like we're in the EEA, we're doing stuff in regards to that. There are numerous like different things. I think Ugur just wrapped up like a conference this week, right? So it was kind of like a virtual conference. I'm actually looking into either going myself or having a few of my business developers go to like a major API conference that's called API Days. There's literally a multitude of different ways to like network and kind of get entrenched in the industry, and I think we're doing a really good job of that. Like we definitely really care about other crypto projects specifically, and there's a lot that we are doing. It's just, you know, we like to kind of, again, I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying, we like to keep our cards close to our chest, keep our heads down, do our work, and then just let the fruits of our labor speak for itself. You know what I mean? So that's probably, you know, because of that, it probably seems like there's a lot of silence going on, but behind the scenes, we are like breakneck pace going at every possible angle of this thing. And I'm really excited about it. We're definitely on the right track. So yeah, I mean, that's a great question though. You know, obviously you want to know that people are like really engaged in the industries that they're working in. So, so yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, there really isn't much more we could do to be even more engaged, especially on the platforms and DApp side. You know, we've done a lot so far, and we're continuing to explore a lot of different avenues for not only enriching our own knowledge and engagement within the community, right, but like also increasing exposure for ourselves as well. One thing I love about the culture here is just we are we're all like a bunch of lifetime learners, right? Like we all care about constantly iterating and being the best version of ourselves. And so with that comes going to, you know, like conferences, doing meetups. I actually think right now we are specifically in communication with like doing more meetups and stuff like that too. So yeah, definitely a great question. And I appreciate the question a lot because it is valuable to be a part of that kind of stuff and to be engaged as a community.
Great. Last one for today before we're signing off. Do we have a registry somewhere of all air nodes registered as providers and offline, online, status, heartbeat, health check, dashboard, respectively monitoring in place?
Yeah, I guess I can take this one. This is pretty much exactly what Chain API is going to do once everything is built. Yeah, so the idea is that we'll have a sort of a listing screen where you'll be able to browse all of the various listed APIs, all of their endpoints, get the information like has this API been online, offline, their heartbeat, stats, all those kinds of things will be integrated pretty soon into the Chain API the app that we're busy building, along with a whole lot of other features that I'll let you guys think about. But yeah, there's a lot of exciting things coming in Chain API, and I'm excited to share them.
Perfect. Thanks, Andre. So that is pretty much it for today. I want to thank Andre, Mason, Eric, and Mark for taking the time today. We will be having this again in 2 weeks. We'll be sending out the Google form next Thursday. So if you have anything that you want to ask us directly, please feel free to fill out the form. And if you don't have the time for it or forget it or whatnot, you always have the chance to drop in and drop us a comment for the second section of our community calls. And with that being said, thanks for tuning in. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.